Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am once again working on my Viking Link cosplay. Now, I have currently made a sword, an axe, a helmet. I did the armor last time. I've made a drinking horn, and now it is time to make an epic belt. Now, typically, if they wore armor on top, they probably didn't wear a belt of this size. It's like a warrior's belt or like a kidney belt meant to protect some vital organs in the stomach area. But mine is just going to kind of go over the top of some armor that's already in that area. So it's not really for protection as much as it will be for holding all the things that I've made so far. So like the axe, the sword, and the drinking horn will hang from it, as well as a couple of other things. So today we are building a warrior belt for my Viking Link mashup cosplay out of leather. Let's get to building. Just like in the previous builds, I'm going to go ahead and restate it again. This is not meant to be a historically accurate Viking cosplay, nor replicas from something of Zelda. It is an amalgamation of various bits from both, along with my own creative twist. I didn't want to build the belt from scratch, and all of the kidney belts that I could find online were either too cheesy or too expensive, so I decided to use a 4-inch wide weight belt as my base. I just needed to get the buckle off. I tried hitting them, sanding them, drilling them out, and none of that seemed to work. So in the end, I used a metal cutting wheel as carefully as I could outside. So you may be thinking, why did he remove the buckle to then put on another buckle? This weight belt fit me when I was wearing it normally, but over my armor with the extra layers that I'm about to put on it, it's not going to close. So removing that one it came with gave me a little extra wiggle room for later. Plus, I thought the thrift store leather belt that I replaced it with looked a little more appropriate. A majority of this build will be punching out holes and riveting pieces on, so I figured out where I need the rivets to go, punch out holes, and then transfer that spacing onto the base and punch those out. Then I use some double cap leather rivets and a hammer to put them together permanently. Since my tabletop is glass, I have to do most of the work outside. I probably go a little overkill on the rivets for each part, but I would rather it be slightly heavier with extra than fall apart with not enough. Now that the belt is functional to wear, the rest of this build is just adding embellishments. I have a general idea in mind of what I want the belt to look like, but a lot of it is making it up as I go. I spent about 8 hours or so on my iPad drawing in various little different symbols and designs that are going to get engraved and attached to the final piece. I convert the drawings to an SVG file, then run them on my Glowforge to burn in and cut out. Here is my Glowforge at work. For the basic shapes that I needed on some of the parts, I just drew them real quickly in Microsoft Paint and imported those into the laser cutting program to then put my symbols or drawings on top of. While yes, it would be possible to burn this stuff in or stamp it in by hand, the machine does it much faster and much more accurately than I possibly could. Initially, I had thought about using this rectangular bit to cover up the weight belt logo, but after I put the buckle on the back, I quickly realized that it was no longer in the center of the belt. I decided to put the middle details in the center and figured my other embellishments would cover it up at least a little bit later. One of the hardest parts for me working with leather, which I have very little experience with, was figuring out the order of operations. This belt is like 5 millimeters thick in the leather, plus another 2 or 3 on the lining. With the extra bits I'm gonna attach, my rivets can only go so thick. So some parts rivet to each other, then rivet to the main body, while others go through them all. These O-rings will hold some other straps and add some cool little decorative elements to the leatherworking. Some will also act as points for me to attach things to, like my drinking horn, my sword, and my axe later. I got a couple of different sizes on Amazon and can see these coming in handy for future builds. Here are some more thrift store finds that will gain a new life as part of my cosplay. Every time I go into a secondhand store, the first thing that I look for are belts. They make good strapping for most builds and are substantially cheaper than buying brand new. Most of my leather scrap tote were only $1 or $2. These braided belts are not leather, but blend in well with the other materials, so I figured I'd use them. I cut them to length, tape off the cuts with some faux leather adhesive back strips, and struggle through trying to work my rivets in between or through the braids. I ended up having to squeeze them shut with the pliers to close the rivets because I couldn't get a good angle to hammer them in. I actually sat down and drew all these Majora masks on my iPad thinking that I would glue them to my armor that I built the last time on this cosplay, but eventually I decided that they didn't really go on them, so I figured they would work good as embellishments for the belt instead. I plopped them into the Glowforge program, set up all the speeds and powers, and let it do its magic. I did make them all, they just couldn't fit on the small scraps of leather that I had, so the 7 missing will show up on the next run. I didn't end up using all of them for the belt, so I'll probably have to find other spots where I can put these decorative pieces on my cosplay. For the leather bits that the laser cutter has engraved, I had to stain them and seal them. I used some brandy brown leather dye from Angelus to do the staining and some mink oil paste from Phoebing to seal and treat the leather. I try to put down even coats of the dye with the applicator, let it dry, then rub a couple of layers of the paste. Mink oil conditions the leather, adding back some oil, it softens it a little bit and helps leather repel water. After making the holder for my drinking horn, I wanted to find some alternative to not like stiffen up the leather like it did with the sealant that I used last time. This stuff seems to work pretty well. Now time to put my little mask engravings onto the belt. I simply lather up the back of them with some contact cement and plop them down into the gaps on the belt. I make sure that there is plenty on the back and put them down wet to let them dry in place. This way I don't have to worry about a lot of cleanup around the edges of the glue. Just make sure that after a couple minutes you tap them down good with the hammer or something so that they have good contact. While most of what you see on television and video games about how Viking armor and clothing looked like is highly inaccurate, I know my mashup is not doing much better in following suit of the over-dramatized aesthetic. While their clothing varied across several hundred years in different areas of the map, most didn't wear cool leather and fur fantasy armor we see like on the shows. So this faux fur on the belt may not be an accurate portrayal, but neither is anything else on this mashup other than maybe the underclothes that I have. I cut out a strip of faux fur, hot glue the edges onto itself, then hot glue it to the back of the belt. I just want the combo of the two worlds to look cool, which is what's driving most of the decisions that I'm using for this cosplay. And we are finished. Here is the end result. I really like the way this thing turned out. It's super fluffy on the inside, so if I was to go berserker and shirtless in battle, it wouldn't chafe my belly. But I think it looks really cool. The main reason I put fur, and I know that it's probably not a practical thing or historical thing, brown armor, just something to kind of break up that mishmash of browns. I thought would kind of help just a little bit, and I think it adds a nice little accent to the border of it. But using that weight belt definitely helped. It was something that was difficult to get those little rivets off of, but I think it worked out in the end and is pretty cool. So yeah, maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to turn some stuff you bought from the store or random scrap bits that you bought from the craft store and make something that's kind of neato mosquito. Yeah, maybe you'll get some yay, and inevitably they're gonna ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them much props. Kind of feel like it's like a championship belt, but for Vikings, so peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to continue to see builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.